And welcome to our webinar today, Mastering the Art of App Advocacy, from users to loyal ambassadors. That is the topic. It's about ways to empower your app fans, and it's also top of mind because if you make, support, or market an app, you must pay attention to what I would call the 3 C's: conversations, constituencies, and communities. Now, in theory, it's all about drawing from everything you know about the user to deliver good customer experiences and show you listen and respond to what your users want or require. But of course, aligning your app experience with user needs and their need states isn't so straightforward. Sometimes you can read it in the reviews, and other times, well, you have to read between the lines. And either way, it's complicated, but it's well worth the effort because, of course, when you get it right, you have a loyal customer base and, more importantly, advocacy, advocates that power a tremendously positive flywheel of growth and commitment, which of course brings me to the topic of today's webinar and our panel of experts. They are here to share their knowledge, but we also want to hear your questions. So of course, use the chat box to ask them anything, and we will get to your questions at the end of the webinar. So let's get started. I am Peggy Salz, your host and moderator today. I am the CEO of Mobile Groove, a content marketing consultancy at the intersection of content and context. And this webinar is in collaboration with AppFollow. So let me kick off by introducing Johnny Davies. Yes, Johnny is head of customer experience at AppFollow. He's worked within customer success for over 15 years across various functions, building high-performing teams, processes, and products that have helped customers succeed. And an interesting fact about Johnny, his passion is storytelling. So it's exactly the skill that you need to engage with audiences effectively today. Welcome, Johnny. We also have Jeffery King, community advocate at Grindr. Jeffery has over 10 years of experience in the training and recruitment industry with a focus on customer experience. At Grindr, he's responsible for elevating concerns from users and working cross-functionally to provide feedback to decision makers. What you won't read on his LinkedIn, well, he loves solving problems. And I would have to say, Jeffery, you have come to the right place because, of course, understanding your user can be a tall order. Welcome, and thanks for joining us. And finally, we have Alon Ravel. He is Vice President of Marketing at Soothe. Alon brings over 13 years of global leadership experience creating high-performing teams and developing innovative marketing strategies. At Soothe, he is responsible for client and provider growth, and that includes growing new skincare and beauty service verticals, business development, brand strategy, and operations for all Soothe products worldwide. What you won't read about Alon on his LinkedIn, he was born in Israel and fluent in Hebrew. So I want to start with you, Alon, because you speak and understand Hebrew, but you also have to speak and understand the language of customer service in your app and outside of it. You also have a marketplace of supply and demand. So catering to 2 stakeholder groups can be quite a difficult dance to do. What do you consider and prioritize in how you approach customer listening?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have more than one product essentially at that point and more than one client. So when people say, who's your client? I'm like, well, depends on who we're focused on right now. We have to keep both the client and the provider happy, dual-sided marketplace.
So how do you balance that in practice? I mean, you have to prioritize what you're hearing from your customers, from the marketplace. How do you consider or prioritize that?
Well, first and foremost, we have to prioritize the providers. Without our providers, we have nothing. So our network is our providers, essentially. That is our value prop. That is what makes us special and unique in the marketplace. We offer basically spa services on demand. So, if you want a massage and you don't have a massage therapist, it doesn't matter if you have, the demand side. You need the supply side happy, committed, and available. We always try to prioritize the provider first and ensuring that they have everything they need and that there is a full good amount of providers within any given city at any given time before we're driving the demand side of the business and focusing on the clients. Well, what we would normally call the clients and not the providers.
So, Alon, you're listening to a marketplace. You have a variety of stakeholders there. In the case of what you're doing, Jeffery, you are listening a lot more to the user because it's about building a strong community and a safe place.
Yeah, absolutely. I spend a big part of my day reading 150, 200, sometimes 300 app reviews. It really helps me keep a pulse on what people are talking about. So sometimes I notice they're not talking about something, which can be a good thing, sometimes not. Or if I notice the way that they are talking about a particular feature or topic, also is important to be mindful of. I also spend a typical day maybe reaching out to our user research team or to our product team to understand what they are working on or what they're even thinking about, because part of my role, or a big part of my role, is to provide feedback to those teams when they're actually going out to either validate an idea or to determine whether something is worthwhile or not. I also spend some individual time talking to users. I'm passionate about the ones and the twos because to me, that's where your word of mouth comes from. If you can help someone individually, get over a ban appeal or help better explain a policy that maybe they don't understand, that's the kind of stuff that makes people feel loyal to your brand and to your product. So I also get to actually speak to users individually about their own unique concerns.
So, Alon, you're more about orchestration. Jeffrey, very focused on a deeper conversation. Now, Johnny, I'm wondering, because we have the two examples here, Alon and Jeffrey, they have different positions in their companies, take very different approaches to the same goal, which is customer success. In an organization overall, you're working with a lot of these organizations. Whose job is it in the organization really to be doing this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you need somebody, an individual person, to set the agenda and to be responsible for the direction of customer success, the strategy, start to create the culture. But then in terms of execution, it's going to sound cheesy, but it's everybody, right? From your support folks on the front line right the way up to your CEO. And ideally, if you're a new business, your app's pretty fresh, let's set about building that culture now. It's very hard to then try and get culturally aligned later down the line. So I would just probably add further that what you want, I think, is very strong stakeholder alliance, somebody in the customer camp and somebody in the customer marketing or kind of marketing camp too.
I want to jump in really fast. I think that customer success actually depends on the company and what customer success actually means at the company. So I think in Jeffrey's case, customer success is ensuring that clients are utilizing new features, that they understand why they're being banned, that they're having a good word of mouth. They're a much more mature company at Grindr than some, like you mentioned, Johnny, a startup. So at a startup, it might be very different. It might just be making sure that every single customer is utilizing the product in the best way. For us, customer success depends on the client or the provider. For the client, it's making sure they're actually getting their appointment, they understand how it works, and they're purchasing and happy with what they've purchased. For the providers, making sure they understand what they need to get to an appointment, what we're giving them, the value add to them, how to get ready, how to get there fast enough, how to make the most out of it for their own business. So it really depends on the goals of the company, the state of the company. Peggy, to answer your question, I think, it really does vary overall with what the mission and goal is for every single organization. I think collectively everyone is though responsible for customer success at the end of the day, because without customer success, you have no company.
So I have to ask you, do you feel responsible for customer success? Because it's not entirely in your wheelhouse, but it is something that you are watching, just not as proactively perhaps as Jeffrey.
Absolutely. I think that part of the leadership team is we're all responsible for it. So it's my job to, if I see something, call it out, bring attention to it if someone else is missing it. I'm sure that, our proper client services team is on top of it. But, I might say, hey, that might be why, our acquisition costs have gone up in the last week. There's a bug in the product. I need to let the product team know, hey, I'm bringing in new users and they're getting stuck at this phase of the funnel. You need to fix that because we're losing funds and we're getting bad reviews. We're getting unhappy clients. It's a joint effort to really understand what's happening. And I just might have vision on one or two or three KPIs, but they're not the same as everyone else's. And that cross collaboration discussion is what really says, oh, that's what's going on.
So you're clearly both good listeners at different levels. I'd like to understand from you, Jeffrey, some of the best sources of customer insight and intel for you? I mean, you're obviously watching a variety of signals. You said yourself, over 100 reviews a day.
Yeah, one of the things that I look out for most, which might sound a bit odd, is anger. Because I found personally that anger usually is masking something else. You know, most of us, whether we're talking about professionally or personally, we're not very good at saying, what you did hurt me, or it made me feel left out, or it made me feel unseen. And so, in my experience, a lot of times when our users are communicating anger, what they're really saying is, you didn't think about me when you maybe made that decision, or I felt unseen, or why don't you care about my particular circumstance? And so, even though it can be initially hard to hear that kind of feedback, because sometimes people are using language that doesn't feel very good to be on the receiving end of, but it's telling because it means that we've hit something. That means that it's something that people really care about and are passionate about, as opposed to, oh, I wish that this had been designed this way, but, it's fine. The anger is a telltale sign that this is something that people really, really care about, because, they're communicating about it in a way that they almost can't control the words that they're using or how they're talking about it. But that sort of sustained anger to me is a telltale sign of, this is something that people actually really care about. And so we need to, at minimum, pay attention to why we got that kind of reaction from them on this particular situation.
I think in the app space in general, anger is the communication. They jump to anger very quickly. Or love, like obsessive love. Like, this absolutely changed my life. This was the best massage I've ever had in my life. Or, you guys screwed me, you took my money. There's not really much in between. The in between is what you're not hearing. And it's important to remember that in between is a good thing. Like, you're getting extremes always. You're going to get the obsessive and the super pissed. You're not really usually getting people who are like, this is a fine product. It is okay. That's not happening. You see it for every sort of, review-based company. Even if you go to Amazon, you usually will see a lot of 1-star and 5-star reviews. You're not going to see many in the middle. So it's just important to remember that. So while it seems anger is like when you're about to lose them, they're still actually angry enough to say something, which means they care, which means you can still impact change at that point.
You brought up reviews. We've talked about ratings, and even in prep, Jeffrey, you were talking about Reddit. Can you give our audience a bit of an idea, sort of like your source or sources of truth, what you're watching to keep it real?
We do use a tool called User Voice. So this is where our users can actually go on and essentially pitch product ideas to us. So we get a lot of useful information. I think to Alon's point, people do communicate quite angrily, quite naturally with app-based products. But on something like User Voice, there's a lot more discussion between users. So even, I would say it's a lot calmer than even Reddit, where I think that communication style can also sometimes be aggressive. Where with User Voice, there's a lot of back and forth between users. So the community is aware that we're there, but most of the time it's them kind of debating whether or not a product is needed. And I always think that that's important because it helps the users understand that they're not the only point of view. And so sometimes they can come to revelations themselves because they're like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. Or I didn't think about how a particular part of the queer community might feel about a particular product, whether that's for or against. So I find User Voice to be particularly helpful in kind of okay, why do people care about this so much? Or how often are we seeing the same product idea come up? Or again, how passionately are people talking about this? And ultimately, what foundational issue are they trying to solve? The way that I think about it is whenever users are proposing something, there is something they're trying to solve. Most of them don't have the expertise to know specifically what that is. That's why we're here to go, oh, that's actually what you're trying to figure out. And sometimes it's, oh, we actually have that already. We need to do a better job of letting customers know that there's actually a solution already for that. But sometimes it's just, oh, this is what they're trying to solve. That's really interesting because that may not be what they're saying, but that's actually what they're looking for in terms of a solution.
So we're talking about how you can listen to the user, where you can listen, the best sources of intel, the best sources of insights. What are they for you, Johnny? What have you heard? What are companies and customer success representatives, what are they telling you?
Yeah, so I mean, we're not short on data nowadays, are we? But but the most obvious source, the place to go for your mobile app insight is, of course, app stores to get the latest hot reviews. If you're lucky, you get lots of them, and you can make some pretty good analysis based on repeating themes and topics. However, as we mentioned earlier, sometimes they're angry, sometimes they're joyful. There's not a lot in between. And when it comes to that in between, I think there's many tools out there. There's many data sets out there that you can bring in to understand more about your customer, your user, and not just about your app in that context, but also about your app in the context of their lifestyle. So how are they using it? What are they using it in conjunction with? How does that all fit together? And I think that's really where the secret sauce is, to be able to make some really key decisions.
Let's talk about those app experiences for a moment, because no matter how good you are, your intentions are good. You want to make and market a great app experience, but it can go south. On the other hand, it can take off and take you by surprise. Alon, maybe you can start by giving us an example of something that went terribly right or terribly wrong and a lesson from that experience.
So one thing we were hearing a lot in 2022 was that providers, through user research, the product team wanted to be able to really more identify where they want to accept offers from. What we heard was that they want to draw on a physical map where they want to receive offers from. So the product team went hard at work to develop this feature, which is literally drawing on a map. With that, though, there was a big change for the providers. What we learned through that, even though we did a huge go-to-market plan, we made blogs, we made videos, tutorials, we met with them, it was a huge change. A lot of our providers are not tech savvy. They don't want change. They wanted everything to stay the same. So we quickly were like, oh my God. And to this day, we still have providers who still struggle with understanding how that feature works. Ultimately, it is the best thing for the providers, and it did get more offers, and it was still best for the business. But just the CS tickets that came in, the questions, the frustration, that anger was there as well. And then there are certain bugs, that had occurred because of it. Like even if you drew the circle, if you didn't fully close the circle perfectly, it was not saving it. Some people are like, I have to draw it again. I don't want to do it again. I already did it. So it caused just frustration and anger, and you don't really know that even though you do user testing, you're prepared. The research part is done. You've done testing before we've launched such a big feature, and still once it's live in the marketplace, it functions differently. And the best thing you can do is adapt, change, evolve, and move forward from situations like that. So it's not always smooth sailing. I think anyone who works in apps know that every single thing is essentially a test. And at the end of the day, tests fail and don't always succeed. And that's okay. It's how you respond to it that's the most important.
You want to take advantage of every single opportunity to engage. And therefore, guess what? Customer education is a fantastic chance to sort of say, hi, here I am, and stay top of mind. What are your thoughts, Alon?
My thoughts are, it really depends on what you're selling and what you're doing, so you need to really get to the root of who your customer is and why they're even using your product in the first place. No one wants to be educated constantly. If you're doing too much education, your product is failing, and therefore you are failing. It is not the right feature, it is not the right product, or you don't have the right audience to know how to use it. Perfect case. Our providers are not that tech savvy. So we have to remember that with every single thing we roll out, we have to keep it what I like to call simple, stupid, and easy to use. And just to close that out for providers too, what's educationally important to them when they're our clients is getting them, how can you make the most money? How can you, what's the right picture for you to upload? What's the right bio for you to put in your profile? How quickly can you get your insurance verified so that you can, be on the Sooth network? That's education they care about. They don't really care to sit there and learn how to use a new feature unless it can get them more money and be done quickly. So it's important to remember that when you're thinking of education.
Jeffrey, an example from you.
Yeah, I was going to go with a positive situation. So last summer during the Mpox outbreak, we were hearing from the community that people were, really, scared and were frightened and weren't sure sort of, what was going on. And so we did a couple of things. We created a field in the app so that people could update their vaccination status. Someone from Grindr for Equality held an Instagram talk with someone from the White House just to be able to provide our community with the information that they needed. And I think the important thing from that was one, that people have agency, right? That it's giving people something that they can do and practical, simple things that they can do from trusted experts. I mean, it's the White House, they are coordinating the response. So, for being able to have sort of day-to-day users being able to hear directly from someone who would know what's going on, to know how they can protect themselves is important. But I also think, again, it was agency. We're giving people something to do. I also think it reminds me that, we need to be true to who we are. In some ways, people might consider Grindr to be a niche app because we are, our community is the queer community. The people that work at Grindr are queers and allies. I use the app. We have users of the app, who work there. And so it's important to remember who we are, and that was something that was specific and unique for our community. And so it's important for us to remember that they are our primary focus and concern.
If we're talking about how to embrace, harness, empower advocates, it's by listening, but also by showing that you care. So your actions as well. Ultimately, however, it has to be good for business too. So there has to be an outcome, a KPI, something that's working. Now, as I understood it, Alon, at Soothe, that means, more bookings, more money. You said it yourself, streamlining the funnel. What has worked so far for you?
You just said that you have to reach your KPIs, but it has to be good for business at the end of the day. Unfortunately, if we're not getting bookings, we're not keeping anyone happy. So luckily for us, that's really the most important thing. If there's a bug or an issue where we have drop off at certain parts of the user flow, we have to consider that. We recently just did something where we had to authenticate our clients as well. Basically, we want to verify them to make sure that our providers are completely safe as well with everyone we're matching them with, essentially. And that actually isn't good for business because we're adding a barrier into the onboarding funnel, but it's good for our providers and for what we stand for and for our mission. So at times you might take a hit slightly to revenue in order to do what's right, in order to keep everyone safe and secure, because we believe everyone should be authenticated and we know who they are and who we're matching people with.
But Jeffrey, let's continue with you for a moment. Also, the whole idea of the outcomes you optimize to, and a way that you have harnessed feedback from users to make it real, measurable impact improvement. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so I don't have typical KPIs like maybe a lot of other teams would. So a big indicator for me that I'm doing a good job by the users, right? Because I'm trying to tell their stories or elevate their concerns, is getting engagement from our product team, from our user research team, are other people in the business sort of going, oh, wow, that's an interesting way to think about that potential problem. I'm the feelings person in the organization. Sometimes my job is to drum up support. So maybe I might be elevating a concern, and maybe it's either not where the business is, or it's not where, people are necessarily focused on. And so sometimes my role is to go, okay, I need to find a way for them to connect to the users who are telling these stories. And so sometimes I'm using passion, sometimes I'm using emotion, sometimes I'm literally showing them things that our users have said to showcase, hey, this is how this person is feeling or experiencing. And that can be used in a positive way too. Sometimes it's, look at the reaction we got from this. This is authentic. We did the right thing because people are so happy. People are so engaged. But it can also be used in the, hey, people are feeling, again, left out. They're feeling vulnerable. They're wondering why they're not seeing themselves reflected in this particular feature.
What's it like with you, Johnny? You're working with so many different companies, people in customer success at a variety of levels. What do you see as being setting the KPIs that they should have top of mind or need to optimize to?
In our support team use case, where we're looking at, as Jeffrey does, hundreds of reviews. I mean, it can be tens of thousands depending on the popularity of the app. Some companies, set targets down to the individual level to say, like, look, you need to be, we want to be answering 100% of these reviews. And you can do that obviously via automation. You don't have to be there doing the heavy lifting. But that's what they want to do. We want 100% response rate. We have something called the reply effect here at AppFollow too, which is where if you do things in the right way and you're responding in a timely way, it can force a positive change as well. And what you do see over time is that really good review practices leads to an increase in rating, which is a really nice metric. That's kind of our metric, but it is something that it's a way for those that manage an app to make sense of their KPIs. And I think, when it comes to feedback more generally from users, I think you've got to complete that loop. There's so much data out there, not just from the reviews on app pages, but everywhere online. It's your job to make sense of that, to have a VOC strategy and to be making that human, telling the hard truths, but also celebrating the successes and getting a VOC culture going within your business. We see some customers actually have a metric for how many insights are we finding from reviews. Sometimes they put a target on that to say, like, look, we want to be driving customer-led changes, not changes from the boardroom or elsewhere. And we need to be hitting, 5 this year. And then communicating those back. It's part of this strategy of saying, we're listening, we're doing something about it, and we're giving back.
We've been talking about how listening is critical, but ultimately what you're going to do is you're encouraging, enabling, equipping your app fans, your customers to tell the world about your app, to be your word of mouth. And a lot of that is about letting users simply lead. And I'll start with you, Jeffrey, because you are very proactive in this process. You said before you ask for suggestions. You have this user voice that you discussed. How are you gathering this? What's the process? How do you make this actionable? How do you let users lead so that you can ultimately harness that?
I think one of the things that makes Grindr unique in terms of my own professional experience is how integrated the CX team is with the wider business. We speak to people more than anyone else. And so it makes sense as a strategy that we would then have direct contact with user research and product and, engineering in terms of bugs. And I've worked at other places where sometimes that doesn't happen. And, people can be surprised that users are upset about something. And it's like, oh, but we're not, because we know that, because we are the people who are constantly speaking to users. I also think, and I personally feel this is something that is underrated, is that you have to have people who care, and that care factor has to match what your user base actually wants. And so I think sometimes it's about the overall strategy. Going back to your talent acquisition, you've got to have people who actually care to solve the problem that's in front of them. And I don't personally think the recruiter in me is coming out. I don't think it's personally enough just to be good individually at what you're doing. I had a conversation with a researcher a couple of months ago where he said, the most important thing you can do as a company is listen to the people who use your product. They will gladly tell you what they love about it and what they don't. And that is your biggest source of, oh, okay, we can do better here, or people expect us to do better here. That's something that I talk about sometimes is user expectations. We may be focused somewhere, but if our users are saying this should have been done better, that's important. Or if our users are saying, I loved this, please do more, that's important too. But you have to be focused on actually solving the problems that your user base cares about.
Lon, what does this look like at Soothe? Because, of course, you have to create value for constituencies and your company. So there's a multitude of stakeholders and a multitude of input.
At the end of the day, it comes down to everyone just communicating, to Jeffrey's point. Like, we're not going to just take one review and make a whole change out of it as well. We really need to understand patterns and behaviors and at the end of the day, reaching our goals. Are those complaints or issues necessarily going to hurt our business long term? Not every hand raiser, not every concern, not every issue is something that needs to be addressed or that we can address or even want to address. Right. So I think that's important as well for us. That's how we kind of look at it. Like, is this a systemic problem for us at the end of the day? And how can we as a whole, looking at our roadmap, prioritize it? And what is the effort versus the outcome and output essentially that we're going to get from it?
So we've heard about how to equip advocates to effectively be your word of mouth advertising. That is the goal. I'd like to know, Johnny, is it worth the effort? And above all, how are you seeing it in real life? What are the right ways to go about it? We've heard from Alon and Jeffrey how they do it. Are they correct in what they're doing?
I'm sure they're correct for what they're doing for now, for their audiences. They know their business is best, but that's not to say it wouldn't change in the future. We see many different ways in which businesses harness the power of the advocate and enable their advocates, if you like. If you're a fast fashion app and you're selling quick, fashionable items to Gen Z, Gen Alpha, you want to be reaching out and incentivizing certain individuals to help push and promote your brand, because that's how that type of product works. So that's incentive all day long. But of course, it has to be measured. Of course, you have to adapt and change that. You don't want to be going in on the empathy key there and saying, we understand what it's like to be a teenager. Why don't you tell us about some of the struggles with keeping up with fashion? No, that's passé. However, if you're on a journey, let's say a health app, like a dieting app, you're going to set yourself milestones, right? And what you do want then is loads of empathy. And you want to be flooded and surrounded by other users who are on a similar journey to you, to give you comfort, to encourage you to come back, and to encourage you to share your own voice in your journey and hopefully become one of those voices, become one of those advocates. So I guess that's an example of incentive for one type of demographic and business, and empathy and sharing and encouragement, for something like more of a lifestyle app.
So we've established that knowledge is the most powerful and productive when it is shared. CX is everyone's business. Listening to the customer is everyone's business. Customer relationship and data feed into the best results. Let's talk about the rules, the ground rules that marketing, that product, that everyone in the organization need to know in order to deliver on this, using and encouraging positive feedback or user feedback, and then making that actionable. Alon, what are your ground rules?
Honesty and everyone just sort of communicating. It's key. How are you communicating? How is knowledge being transferred to everyone else? How does someone know that there's an issue, especially in a remote environment? Is there a certain Slack channel? Is there a certain form? Are we all following the same process? Without that, there's always going to be miscommunication and misalignment. That's the number one rule. I do not believe that you need to teach your customer anything. I kind of touched on it earlier when we were talking, but if you're teaching your customer something, then the product is failing. Your customer needs to be able to come into your product, know exactly what to do, exactly where to go, and why they're there in the first place. If they don't know why they're there, the product isn't giving them what they're looking for within seconds, you've lost them potentially forever. So in our case, people need to come in, know that they're looking for a certain spa service, be able to see price, see provider, see cost, and then be able to purchase, check out within seconds. If they cannot, if they're coming in and let's say they see something about relaxing music to use for your massage, they're gone. That's not what they're looking for. That's something that you can maybe offer to them at the right time, which would be during the service. For example, you could say, hey, your provider is 5 minutes away. Here's some music you can play in preparation. It's about being at the right place at the right time, giving them what they need. That's a way to educate them essentially that your product has that, but at the right time. If we're educating them about that at the wrong time, then you're failing. That's what I mean when I say you should not be educating your customers, because you just need to offer them the right thing at the right time.
Jeffrey, the same question to you. The ground rules of marketing of product to deliver this type of experience. Alon says it's down a lot to context as well as understanding your user. What are your views?
Authenticity. If Yeah, if you are out there, in I guess thinking about Grindr specifically, we have to be authentic, that we are, champions of the queer community. That means that starts internally as well. There have to be people who care about that. There have to be people who are part of the community. There have to be people who use the app, because we need people to care on multiple levels. And it also means that we have to be mindful of the products that we're putting out there. The whole point of this app is we want queer people, to be able to connect in a way that society hasn't often allowed them to do so. That means that everything that we do needs to feel authentic to that experience. And you get that by having people who have that experience. I think also, just more generally, in terms of customer experience and product and marketing, you need people who care about those things, who are passionate about those things. I mentioned earlier, I think ticking the boxes isn't enough nowadays. You need people who are very good at what they do, but who ultimately care about the solutions that your customers are asking for.
I want to wrap up with what I call the traffic light advice here. So based on your learnings in this year, your advice to your peers, what they should start doing, in other words, the green light, stop doing, or continue to set themselves up for success in 2024. I'll start with you, Alon. The start, stop, continue for success in 2024.
Start using AI to help you. Stop trying to do everything. Do one thing and do it well. One KPI per department per quarter will get you much more success. Continue to broadly target your audience. Let the algorithms essentially speak for you and do more of the work for you. Hyper targeting and hyper focusing too much ends up not being good for your business bottom line metrics.
Jeffrey, same question. Start, stop, continue.
Start taking your user feedback seriously. If people are passionate enough to leave you a comment, even if it's negative, take that. That is helpful information. Continue diversity and inclusion initiatives. The best way to make more money and to connect with people is to have those diversity in your workplace. And that can be diversity by race, gender, age, experience. So continue those things. And I think I would say stop taking users for granted. They have a lot of passion and energy, and it's important that you take the time to show appreciation for people who are parting with their hard-earned money.
Johnny, you. Also, the same question. Start, stop, continue.
Start using your customers and your users' language always. If you're not already, it's very easy to use your brand voice rather than your customer's voice. But if you can resonate, you'll go further. Stop, when it comes to marketing, consider that it's a journey, right? You're not marketing to get people into your app and into that funnel, and then you walk away once they become users. Partner with them on the journey, right? Showing an alliance and surrounding them with customer stories so that they begin to share their own, of course. And continue customer advocacy efforts, create a customer advocacy program, a VOC program, and invest in that as well as any paid efforts. Paid advertising is getting more expensive by the week. People advocacy is kind of free. Obviously, you need to invest and create structures around that. And my final comment, in this new world, the dawn of misinformation, it's going to become even more important to have the voice of the human, of the person that you know, that you trust, in order to help you understand, your purchase better.
Well, thank you, Alon, Jeffrey, Johnny. Thanks for sharing your insights and advice. And of course, thanks to you, our audience, for joining us here today. We are all here to answer your questions, so I will open it up for your input, feedback, and questions. Just use the chat function in the platform. And that's a wrap. This has been Mastering the Art of App Advocacy. Thank you all for attending. And if you're thinking, hey, this webinar is one I want to see again, I want to share it with my colleagues, well, just look for follow-up details and a follow-up email where you can watch this webinar on demand. Until then, thanks for listening.